You could take your seats. If the administrator could take a seat.
That's why. It's almost like that's why they have it facing away from them.
It worked. Got his attention. Welcome back. Are we having fun? All right. Any other? Chris, you hit a.
Are we good? There we go. Just one final kind of question here, and that is, it gets to, it is possible that if that were, that 369 was approved, that the cash reserve could be used for that. Would that have to be written into the resolution, or would that line item, that fund transfer, have to be done to allow them the opportunity in the library to do that? Or is it going to be a direct cut out of each one of those categories? You see where I'm going with that? Do they have the option to be able to use cash reserve to fund what I'm suggesting?
So I want to make sure I reflect back the question. So is your question that if Amendment 6 is adopted by the full board and those individual line items are reduced by the amounts within, which total $365,000, could the library board amend their budget by taking small capital fund, their own small capital reserve, and plugging it in there?
Yes.
Yeah. I think we have heads nodding across the lawyer, the
Yep.
accountant, and myself.
Once the county board appropriates to the library, they make the final decision on where the appropriations go, so they could make that change, yeah.
All right. What are your wishes relative to this? Supervisor Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Based on Supervisor Baker's calculations, they will be adding about $259,000 on a prorated basis to the fund balance just for this year. So I would recommend to Supervisor Dickinson that he make his amendment $259,000 or $250,000, which would essentially take care of what would normally go to fund balance for their underspending for this year. Do I have that right, Mr. Baker?
So I have calculated that there would be, with the 365, they'd be 106,000 short. So if we took that down by 106,000, then we'd be funding them at the average of the last 2 years. I'm not sure if I understood your question right, but.
Yes, that's it.
All right. We have no motion before us. Chair Gibbs.
I just, one of the things that I think is totally incumbent upon us to understand is I understand what historic numbers present, but what isn't taken into consideration when we take the historic averages over the last 2 years is we came through a pandemic. We had, in some cases, direct reductions in staff and non-filling of those staff at the library, and we just authorized a pay study that possibly changes those budgeted amounts. So I caution in reducing based on historic averages over the last 2 years when the implementation of the pay study is going to have an impact on that average. And I think the other thing is that the last 2 years' history has some vacancies that were not filled because of the pandemic. So I just caution, and now we're back fully open. I don't know that that number would hold true. I bring it up as a discussion point.
Supervisor Dickinson.
Just as a clarification, the numbers I looked at go back to 2018. It's just not the last 2 years. It's actually the last 5 years.
What are your wishes? Supervisor Leahy.
I move to not recommend amendment number 6 to the full board.
Is there a second? Been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on the motion? Supervisor Lambert, seconded, sorry. Any discussion? Supervisor Marshall?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will vote to support this amendment I will vote to support denying it at the current rate, but I would support something of a lesser amount.
Motion is to not recommend, and the options for you to do that would be to vote no and have that prevail, and then have a motion to approve and amend, or to bring that amendment up tomorrow. And remember that we're going to go through all of this again. So those are your options. So those deja vu all over again, it's just Yogi Berra or somebody like that. Any other discussion? If not, all those in favor of the motion not to recommend Amendment 6 will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries. The issue now is there, Mike, can we now that we have that motion, it would be inappropriate to have another one, correct? Okay, so that amendment, Gail, if you wish to, would be to bring it in tomorrow. And work on that. All right, Amendment 7, Supervisor Baker.
Chair Robinson. So the original impetus for this proposal was the desire and request on behalf of several supervisors to have more detailed budget data, more detailed quarterly or monthly reports that give both actual expense by line and budget by line. As I tried to figure out how to do that, I talked to Chair Gibbs after a meeting one night, and he had said he didn't think that we have the resources in-house to do that, and I would agree with that. So I also had a request from a constituent or from a county resident that we have an auditor, hire an auditor. So I kind of combined those two. And as I was researching those, I found in the Wisconsin State Statutes 5947 that it clearly spells out the powers and duties of a county auditor. And to my surprise, and I believe the surprise of both the county clerk and the corp counsel, that the clerk is actually supposed to be our county auditor. And so I had a discussion with Kim and later with Christy, and Kim, I believe, would say, please don't ask me to do that. It would be the accurate, so, and I didn't think that she had either the time or the resources to do that. So basically what I'm proposing is that we, on a pilot program, if you will, for 2 years, use ARPA funding to hire a county auditor. The county auditor, under my interpretation of the state statutes, would report to the board and would be appointed by the chairman of the board, so Chair Gibbs. I sent out an email a few minutes ago, which gives more specifically what I would see the auditor's responsibilities would be. However, per statute, those would be set by the board. We could add or subtract for those. And if you read this, I'm not going to read the whole, it's only about 3 paragraphs, but I'm not going to read the whole 3 paragraphs, because you can read that. It's 5947, 1, 2, and 3. But what I would see that the auditors do, what I would propose that the auditor's duties would be, which would be a resolution subsequent, or could be part of it, but I don't have this in the resolution, is that the number one duties would be to compile and present actual versus budget detailed numbers on a quarterly basis. And those would be provided to the HR Finance Committee. And then number 2 would be to identify potential areas of savings throughout Marathon County government. And then 3, as time permits, act as an additional resource and coordinate board feedback to help ensure that the workday implementation enables the ability to provide timely financial reporting that meets the board and HR Finance Committee's requirements and expectations. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Supervisor Leahy and then Supervisor Zhang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You just mentioned that this would be a pilot program. Is that stated in the wording of the amendment?
It is not stated in the wording amendment, but it is implied by the ARPA funding. So that I could change the amendment if that needs to be, but
Okay.
no, it is not clearly stated in there. that it
Okay,
is.
we've had a lot of discussion at the board lately about pilot programs and the danger of them turning into permanent programs. So I guess that might be something that you want to clear up. Thank you.
Supervisor Zhang.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A question for Supervisor Baker. Is there any other counties that have a county auditor, an actual position?
So I talked to John Rader, our external auditor, and he did not believe that there was. At one point, Waukesha County did have a county auditor. As far as I can tell, she perhaps retired and is not there any longer. Brown County, in their section on county board, it shows a county auditor position, lists the pay for the county auditor, and I did not find additional information beyond that, so I was going to call them, but I didn't have time to follow up with that. So as far as I know, John Rader said he wasn't aware of any. He said in the state of Illinois, every county that is a client of his has one, but in the state of Wisconsin, he says it's fairly rare.
Supervisor Lemmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've been asking for some different financials, so on the one hand, I do support this, but I'm just wondering how this would fit with, I mean, we'd have to hire somebody. I assume that involves Molly. I don't know. I mean, could you discuss how this might impact staff and the timeline for getting this auditor in place if it did move forward?
So I worked with Christy and Michael to develop this, and Christy went to Molly, I believe, right? And so Molly set the pay range. I had suggested, 3, but I said I didn't know if those were correct. So she suggested the pay range. I would expect that we would not have this person in place by the first of the year, but we haven't discussed specific timeframes yet.
Chair Gibbs and then Yee. Or I think Yee was actually first and then.
I'll let Chairman.
Go ahead, I'll yield to you.
Thank you. The other question I have as a follow-up here is, do you foresee there being any supporting staff for this position? It sounds like there's a lot of work that's going to entail from this position or responsibilities here. I would assume that there would be some supporting staff in the future here. Would that be additional? That would be additional costs that would incur on us in addition to the supporting staff, but also overhead costs that potentially could come in, whether it's office rental, et cetera. Just kind of wanting that clarified as well.
Okay, so the state statute allows for, let me find it here. The state statute says the board by resolution may authorize a county auditor to appoint a deputy and/or a deputy auditor. I did not anticipate that we would do that, so that there would be no support staff. I asked Christy if we needed to add extra money for computers or for other ancillary things like that, and I believe the answer was that those were covered in the budget, that there was money in the budget for that. So there would be some additional cost, but they aren't included in the resolution per my discussion with Christy.
Chair Gibbs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In some ways, Supervisor Baker, I really appreciate you bringing this forward because I have been in various capacities, served as chair of finance. I have served as chair of the board. I've served on finance. And I have historically, literally, probably every term, and a minimum of every term, requested actual versus budgeted for each department, whether it be on a quarterly basis or a semi-annual basis for the HR Finance Committee to review. I totally understand also the limitations that we have with the current system that we currently have, that being the Kayenta system, and the 100 and some spreadsheets that go through and produce additional inputs into Kayenta and outputs for Kayenta. And we've heard from our finance director directly that we actually ask our auditor to produce our audited financial statements because of the lack of ability of Kayenta. That's also why this board the previous board has authorized for the implementation of Workday. So I've got several questions. One, I believe that Workday, once fully implemented, will be able to provide us pretty easily these reports that we're talking about asking for, meaning budgeted, actual year-to-date, and comparison, and multiple year comparisons once the data has been compiled over several years in Workday. I'm not going to support this amendment for several reasons. One, we haven't gone through the new hire process and the evaluation. I think we have some challenges. I think we have some difficulties in the reporting relationship, and I've asked the Corp Counsel, and it may be a difference in understanding or difference in interpretation as to the proper reporting relationship where the auditor can provide reports as anybody can, as anybody in the finance department can provide reports to the finance committee or provide reports to the full board. But I think from a reporting relationship, I don't know that we have fully developed where that reporting relationship has and needs to be under an administrative form of county government and governance. I think that responsibility belongs to hire, supervise, evaluate is on the administrator and not on the county board. So I would refer to the Corp Counsel to clarify if your interpretation that they would be a direct report to the board or if they have to report through the administrator and if we've got any clarification as of this point.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Supervisor Baker and I have had several interesting discussions about this over email. I think it's an interesting question because I'm a nerd, but 5947 is the statute that allows a county to create a county auditor. And as Supervisor Baker said, the county can either apply those duties to the county clerk or it can create a separate office. One of the subsections of 5947, subsection 3, indicates that the county board chair shall appoint that officer. The issue that I see is that 5918 sub 2B, which talks about the county administrator's power, says that any department head appointed otherwise appointed under the statutes by the county board chair is appointed by the county administrator in an administrator system of government. So the auditor statute does not have the subsection saying, in the event you have a county administrator, the administrator shall appoint. In the Corp Counsel statute, for instance, it's very clear. In the auditor section, it doesn't say anything at all about who appoints, but if you compare 5918 and 5947, 5918 to me would seem to be the more specific statute that would control over 5947 and would require the administrator to make the appointment. I sent this question out to, we have a listserv of corp counsels across the state. I got one response from the former Door County Corporation Counsel who said, I agree with your interpretation, but I haven't done the analysis myself. So that wasn't super helpful to my analysis. I did also send this to our Attorney General's office because I'm empowered under statute to request Attorney General's opinions. I haven't received an acknowledgement yet, probably because he's doing other things, I would assume. But I think it's an open legal question. I appreciate Supervisor Baker's interpretation, and I think there's a reason to his interpretation. I think there's reason to my reading as well, and I don't have a good answer as to if a court were deciding this, what would the court say? I feel like they would say, interpret it the way I'm suggesting, but I don't know that for sure, and I can't say for sure which way it would go.
Lance?
I actually don't want to weigh in on the legal stuff, but I appreciate the comments from Chair Gibbs, and I just want to give a little bit of context of how we normally operate. I think, I can't remember who made reference to our new position request process, and let you know kind of how we would normally do this, and also reference the comments relative to Workday. I hesitate to say that it's going to be easy under Workday to compile and present actual versus budget, but I'm very, very confident saying it's going to be a lot easier to do it, and I will make a commitment to this committee and to the full board. We will present you with budget versus actual information on a regular basis. That is the core function. In my mind, and Christy, I'd certainly defer to you, not so much of an auditor, but that's a finance department function in a great many counties with a finance system that isn't older than some of the supervisors perhaps on the board. I don't know. But I will, dovetailing then with our new position process. So when a department head comes through the budget and says, hey, I want a new position, what we do is we require them, what I do is I require them to articulate what is the need, what are the things they're trying to solve, how much FTE is their proposal to solve it, and then we do an analysis of, as Supervisor Baker did essentially with the costing, asking our HR director to say, all right, assuming that this position is a full-time equivalent, what's the cost under our current compensation structure? So while I didn't have the opportunity to speak with Supervisor Baker about this, I did reach out similarly to what Corp Counsel did to my network of colleagues, just asking, hey, how do you perform what I understood? And I think perhaps my understanding, my interpretation of the amendment is flawed. What I understood the internal auditor to be was more of an internal audit function of let's review the expenditures, let's look at internal, the controls within the individual department, and essentially make sure that everything is above board relative to accounting and financial reporting, as opposed to the presentation of budget versus actual and identifying potential areas of savings and assisting on the workday. I view those things more as finance department staff, perhaps a budget analyst for number 2 on your email of potential budget savings. So I apologize for that inaccuracy of understanding. But as it relates to internal audit, I did reach out to my colleagues and ask, as Supervisor Baker made reference to, does anyone else do this? And what I can tell you is that the majority of counties, in fact, every county that reported that indicated they have an internal audit function, it's embedded within the job duties of their finance director. There was one county that reported, yeah, we have an internal auditor. The gentleman is the administrator for Barron County. He's a CPA, and he responded, as you might guess, he loves it. He loves having an internal auditor. And as I asked him, like, help me understand what the individual does, and he indicated that, they will really dive into the internal accounts of individual departments to help better understand them on an as-needed basis. And that struck me as, okay, that's a great idea, but I don't see that as a full-time job all the time. And he then proceeded to share that, no, in fact, it's that, again, the finance director that does that. So it's in addition to all the things that you hear Christy talk about, development of the budget, overseeing the external audit, all those things are kind of melded in one. The only other piece I'll add is that there was one county that responded that they actually outsource the internal audit function, and that was intriguing to me, so I did ask to review the contract that they utilize to do that, and the contract is a little dated. My recollection, it was from 2014, a 3-year contract, but the cost to essentially go in and have an outside eyes review internal departments to, again, make sure that everything from the accounting perspective is being done appropriately. They were contracting for between $10,000 and $15,000 annually to do several departments. So if this is something that the board is supportive of, my suggestion, and certainly do with it what you will, but you can absolutely direct me as part of the work plan to identify what are a couple of options for you to pursue, specifically the items that you're seeking to, and I appreciate, Supervisor Baker, that my assumption relative to what your aim was is not what you just sent me in terms of an email. But either way, I'd be happy to talk with you if you're inclined. Relative to the items in the email, I can also tell you that Christy and I, when I first started as administrator, right before the pandemic, had ran plans of identifying a budget analyst as a valuable position, and we do have a draft job description ready to go. It's just that things happened in March of 2020 that took us a far afield of moving forward in that direction. But I totally appreciate that there would be value to having a budget analyst assist in the department budget generation process and the overall development of the budget. That was a long rambling answer, but happy to sit down and talk.
Supervisor Leahy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too am intrigued by this position and the value that there's potential for value here. But based on the fact that, this is suggesting that we use ARPA funds and we haven't discussed that aspect at this committee like we have other things, based on the fact that it's not following, the standard job creation process, based on the fact that it's not super clear whether this would be a temporary 1 or 2 year position or a permanent position. And frankly, just based on the legal statutes that are still kind of up in the air, I simply can't support this amendment or further amendments around this topic at this time. I appreciate the administrator's suggestion to look into this further, because again, I do agree that there could be value here, but I would be ready at this point to move that we do not recommend amendment number 7 to the full board at this time. Thank
The
you.
motion, is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Jean. Any discussion? Supervisor Baker had his hand up before, and then
Thank you. So I do want to respond to Chair Gibbs that I agree that we would like to have Workday and be able to provide this function, and we hope that it would. And this is, it was intended as a bridge for 2 years till that happens. I don't expect that is going to be, I hope, but don't expect that Workday will be able to provide that in the near term. Maybe I'll be pleasantly surprised. But this was intended, to basically bridge that. So that's why it was a short-term ARPA-funded project. In terms of the reporting structure, there is certainly support in the statutes to make it a departmental function. It's clearly that it can be that. It's also, I believe, support to make it a board, reporting to the board. But, well, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to claim that I have the right answer to that. And then in response to Lance, you didn't misinterpret me, so you don't, that it is defined as internal auditor, and those functions were included, but then I don't necessarily see that being a full-time job either. So, and the statute allows the board to, specifically the board, so it seems to be, clear that it's the board that's doing it. It allows the board to grant additional authorities and duties, and those 3 duties that I had in the email are in addition to the auditor role. So you were correct in your analysis. I just provided some additional potential responsibilities. Thank you.
Let me just point out a couple of things. You know, I am intrigued with Workday in the capacity that it will bring to us in terms of additional enhanced accountability and data. We recently updated our procurement policy to build in more safeguards into the purchasing power with additional checkoffs and controls, and that will be incorporated into Workday as well. And we do have the audit report that we look at. And the audit report didn't point out the need for the internal auditor as much as it did for the importance of financial staff for reconciliation. And I think that's a different function, and I think that's where some of the problems occur. And then the next amendment deals with that whole issue of do we have data to make decisions? And you know, some of the best days of my life were spent in the legislature, where there are the Legislative Fiscal Bureau, Legislative Reference Bureau, Legislative Council, and the Legislative Audit Bureau, all of which provide input into gathering data, analyzing programs, and providing options. I think that's the critical need of the county board versus internal auditors, but having somebody that can take the data, look at what the requirements are, and begin to develop those recommendations on how we can move forward and have some savings. And I commend Supervisor Baker for bringing the issue to us. I think that there's a need for better information for decision making. I'm just not sure if the auditor or a data analyst is a better position. Supervisor Jean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too agree. I think the position is a very unique position. It's also something that we can potentially look at in the future. But you know, from the discussions and reading the state statutes, it doesn't seem like this position would be there would be enough workload for a full-time position. And I know that this board has been talking about trying to keep, trying to be accountable with the taxpayers' dollars, whether it's ARPA dollars or taxpayers or the tax levy, etc. And even when we have discussions, and from my understanding, from what Administrator Leonard is saying, is that if we are indeed intrigued and want to pursue this, we could indeed contract this out to a different to an exterior entity or a company to do or to uphold or ensure the duties and roles and responsibilities as outlined in the state statute. So at this moment here, I will be voting against it as well. But I am intrigued and welcome any other future discussions on this. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Supervisor Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The intent of this is to examine our processes and make it more efficient. Most businesses have a continuous improvement officer who looks to do those very things, and usually their return on investment is 3 to 4 times what their salary is. So this is not a draw. Would be a benefit, and I will support it.
Lance?
Just to follow up on that point, we do have we had a position a couple of years ago. I drafted the new position request myself and presented it to the HR committee as the Deputy Administrator, Organizational Excellence Program Manager. So we did exactly that, which is a continuous improvement program that we put in place. And if you recall, within your strategic plan, there's Objective 12.3, and one of the measures is that within every department, we train individuals on the principles of waste, the 8 theories of waste, and how they can identify waste. And then we have a higher level program where those individuals then essentially process map using a wide variety of tools, processes within the organization to identify waste and eliminate it and improve our processes. In fact, Corp Council just wrapped up one with, was it last week, 2 weeks ago, with that individual that oversees that program. That person was hired in that position was Molly Adzik, who does such a great job. I selected her to be the Human Resource Director, and really our goal is to train everyone in our organization on those principles. So we're doing that. With Molly doing Workday, she's doing less than I know she would like to. But to your point, Supervisor Marshall, absolutely, the value of continuous improvement, it's difficult to overstate. One of the programs we do with Corp Council, they're our shining example of a process improvement, and it's a 75-cent clipboard. So couldn't agree more, but we have that position already.
Any other discussion? If not, there's a motion and a second to not recommend. All those in favor will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no?
No.
That motion carries, but not unanimously. Amendment 8.
So I am withdrawing Amendment 8,
Okay.
and it is being, I don't know if replaced is the correct term. There was an amendment related to 8. So 8 is basically the same audit function, but it is funded by eliminating the data officer. And in lieu of the ambiguity or uncertainty in terms of the reporting on, getting a opinion from the Attorney General, that just makes everything too messy. So I'm withdrawing that, but I have discussed with Supervisor Sandelsky, who had a motion amendment, and so he's replacing it with that. So I emailed that out. If you want me to go over that, I can, but that's not my amendment.
It's not a,
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I don't think that replacement amendment is on the agenda, so I guess I would say it could be brought up tomorrow at the county board meeting, but I don't think it can be discussed today.
That was our intention.
Okay, thank you.
okay. But I would like to just revisit the issue of, the administrator talked about evaluating this as part of the work plan. Let's make sure that discussion takes place, and we'll make sure that issue stays alive. So no matter what happens, well, if we hire someone based on the action tomorrow, there may not be a need to do it, but we'll look at it. Supervisor Jean.
Mr. Chairman, I would just make a request that also gets sent out to the rest of the board members as well, too, if it has not yet. The request made by Supervisor Sandelsky as well, too. So just want to put that out there.
Okay. Moving on to Amendment 9. That is offered by who's Supervisor Twelve?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The reason that I put that forth, that amendment, was in our previous, whether it was this year or the year before, we had given a sizable amount to the Central Wisconsin Housing Initiative for the housing study. And also the Central Wisconsin Workforce Development Board has made significant investments in their effort to bring more childcare to this area. So given that we have 2 Central Wisconsin agencies working on this initiative, it seems like a duplication of effort. Thank you.
Supervisor Leahy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess maybe some clarification about the committee budget. It is not dictated what they have to spend that money on, correct? That can change from term to term. That committee decides that?
I'll start and then
Or
the lawyer can go. My intent was,
the attorneys are fighting over
yeah,
your
my
spot.
intent was to give the committee the authority to spend those funds in pursuit of figuring out what the county's role was with, excuse me, with respect to each of those issues. Just to clarify, however, that it's one-time money. It wasn't intended to go over multiple terms, and I don't know if that was, I thought you said a couple of years, but no, it's within the next term of the board.
And just to follow up on that, as far as what the money can be spent on, I think it would have to be spent, as the administrator said, towards the pursuit of the goal as stated. I don't think it could be spent on something completely different, but there's discretion on, how you reach that goal, I think. And I think that's how the fund was set up.
Any other discussion? I just grabbed the Wausau Daily Herald from yesterday, which talked about the 130,000 person law or job, people, workforce reduction over the next few years and how we need to be more attractive or be able to attract more talent. And it's a real concern. And I don't know what the answer is, but this may help. But any other discussion? Supervisor Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I kind of hate to say this, but I'm a little indifferent to this because I'd like to hear from someone on the EED committee to see what the intentions are to spend this on, if they've had any discussions of what they want to spend this on. I'm hesitant to support this without any input from that committee because I kind of just don't want to overstep our role to say we're going to take funding away from another committee. And I think that has to be a discussion that the full board has to have. Thank you.
Chair Gibbs?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did have a discussion, and unfortunately, the chair of that committee could not be here. He's a farmer by trade, and he was able to actually be in the field and combine corn, trying to get finished before we see that white stuff flying in the air. So I know he is committed to being here tomorrow. So maybe my recommendation would be we take no action in support or denial of Amendment 9 and let that be discussed at the full board. Okay.
What are your wishes? Seeing no motion, we will move on. Okay, item 10. Supervisor Baker.
Okay, so item 10 is similar to item 9. Amendment 10 is similar to Amendment 9, and I am a member of the EED committee. So I can tell you that we have had no discussions. We did not request this funding. We have had discussions about both housing and childcare. And I have had discussions with both Lance and Chair Gibbs about housing and childcare. And I emailed them about a month ago and said I would be happy to take an active role in or lead the discussion on EED to basically develop policy for the county government to help develop that policy and make recommendations to the executive committee and the full board. But I believe that is a role for our board, not a role for outside consultants. So I am basically proposing that we take the $50,000 from that is set aside for the consulting and use that instead to help implement Workday. So.
Supervisor Leahy and then Supervisor Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So did this go through, was this an agenda item on the EED committee at one point? Have you discussed this with your colleagues?
I have not discussed it with my colleagues because I didn't want to violate open meetings law. And we have not met because our chair is a farmer and has been farming, so we didn't have our meeting this month to be able to do that.
Okay, and yes, to be clear, I wasn't trying to ask if you were violating open meetings or anything. No, I just meant at previous committee meetings, this hasn't been discussed.
That is correct. That is correct. Because, like I say, we would have discussed it this month, but our meeting was canceled.
Okay. Again, this kind of goes back to what Supervisor Hart said about the previous amendment. This seems like a committee issue, determining what to do with this money or sending it back to a different account feels like a committee issue, a EED committee issue. I guess I don't feel comfortable deliberating on something like this right now at this committee. Thank you.
Supervisor Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question for administration. Do you need $50,000 in order to implement Workday any further? Thank you.
Not today, but if I need it tomorrow, I'll come ask. Staff are working diligently. We have a capital improvement fund. Christie, I don't know if you have anything else. We have a mechanism for the funds we need now, but I am very clear, those things may change.
It was just suggested that we may have a need for pizza, so if we could redirect those funds to.
That motion.
Supervisor Zhang, then Supervisor Hurd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Supervisor Baker, I noticed, I heard you mention, and maybe I heard you wrong, but you said that from my understanding, the discussion about this has not happened yet, but you made a comment that you would rather have it go towards the ERP than consultants. So I was just kind of curious as to where the discussion about consultants came in as well, just so that I have a better understanding.
Lance can correct me if I'm wrong, but I asked Lance what he had intended for the $50,000, and I thought that was his response, that was one of the, I don't want to say he limited it to that, but that was one of the things that he listed, so.
Yeah, it was really just, these are big issues that, as Supervisor Baker referenced, that the committee has been talking about. You may recall, and I think it actually happened during the previous term of the board. As part of the work plan, I was directed to apply for a grant, the Partner Up grant, no, not the Partner Up grant, the Dream Up grant through the State of Wisconsin Department of Children and Families to go through a strategic planning event relative to childcare and the kind of the role of the county as an entity to address that. So that was the impetus to put it in the budget, along with the discussion about housing. As Supervisor Marshall referenced, the county did fund that work by North Central Wisconsin Regional Planning to do that housing study, and my understanding is they're looking to come present that in the very near future, not only here but at other stakeholders. So just with those two issues looming, my sense was that they may require additional assistance, whether it's a consultant for a study, which is what the tact that the board took relative to broadband, or it's facilitation services, similar to what the board took with respect to the criminal justice system a number of years ago. They hired the Wisconsin Institute on Public Policy and Service to come in and facilitate a series of events, or if it's communications to the public like the board did with the uniform addressing program. They put in place a pretty robust communication plan. There was no limits on what I thought the funding would be used for, just that the committee might need those funds to address coming to that endpoint, that policy decision of what the role of Marathon County government was.
Follow up?
Quick? Go ahead.
I'll keep it quick. So to summarize that, then it has not been earmarked for anything then, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Chair Gibbs.
May I make a suggestion in light of what we chose to do or not do, more specifically, on amendment number 9? Let's take no action on item 10, because item 9 is dependent on item 10 is dependent on item 9.
Is that acceptable? And we'll have those discussions with the expectation that we'll hear from the chair of the committee tomorrow, and then let the board decide. All right, we will move on to Amendment 11. Gail?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Nurse Family Partnership Program is a discretionary program that is not mandated by state statute or local ordinance. Currently, 8 out of 72 counties participate from their website. Looking back, it appears that we serve between 100 and 150 persons over the last couple of years. I know Administrator Leonard had said he likes analogies. Based on the cost of this program, this is a Range Rover version of helping bring in healthy babies, not a Chevy version. The program is 100% discretionary, and I asked if this program has touched every city and township. by asking for the zip codes of the people served. I was told that that information is not available. The board would be asking the health department to change the scope through an RFP. In other words, to reduce the levy as well as reduce the scope of the program. While this fits the healthiest goal that we have, the county does not fund bariatric surgery that would make people healthier. It does not fund gym memberships in an aid to make people healthier. There's all kinds of things we do not fund that make people healthier. It is a discretionary program like the Community Clubhouse program that has been eliminated by North Central Healthcare's budget. And while the board decides the how and the what, the how much and the what, Administrator Leonard has reminded us that the county employees decide the how and the with whom. So I know that there is a huge concern that this is an effort to usher in Hope Life Center. While that has been offered, I realize that is not my role, that is not our role to decide. That is up to the county department. So this does not designate any particular provider. This is an effort to make taxes, local taxes, more affordable. And simply that's it. Again, this is a completely discretionary program. It does not mean that the recipients would have not access to medical care. Thank you.
Supervisor Leahy and then Lumber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a clarification in the fourth whereas, the amendment does state that they want to reduce the budget to remove, but those two numbers are, of course, different numbers, and it does leave $220,000. So are you implying that that gap, the $220,000 that remains, should still be utilized for a program such as this? Or do you mean to actually remove the entire amount of money?
No, I left $220,000 as a reduction in scope or number of people served.
Okay, so we're not actually
You're not eliminating the program.
And I can clarify this one, because you have a fully funded program at 841,507, the contractuals, all the money's already in there. So what the intention is to leave a $220,000 amount in contractual services for the program to be based on a $220,000 contractual service amount. So what it did was it eliminated all of the other items and leaves you with $220,000 contractual services supported by $220,000 in tax levy. It's kind of the opposite, because you'd fully put the 841 in. So what I believe the intention was of the supervisor was to create the program so that you have $220,000 contractual services supported by the 220 in levy.
Okay, follow up. I guess I'm maybe just being a stickler for language with the English minor, but like we've been told, by staff who vet these programs that this particular program costs $841,507. So leaving the $220,000 isn't actually still providing this particular program. So I guess I'm kind of concerned about this language.
Supervisor Lumber.
I hate to sound like a broken record, and thank you, Mr. Chair, but I feel like early intervention pays dividends. If we can support pregnant people when they're just developing a baby inside, that could be 80 years of payback over the lifetime of that child, and it prevents crisis situations later. I have talked with people from the health department who are involved, and they're working with the most vulnerable and traumatic people. I've got a couple of scenarios here that are they're terrible, and they need significant support. It's not just healthcare, it's emotional, sometimes it's AODA based, sometimes it's very tailored. And right now we're using Start Right. This is a considerable savings over Start Right. And the savings this year is a fraction because of the startup costs needed. It will only continue to compound. And so I can't say enough how much I think this program needs to be in place. If we were to go to an RFP, that could be months-long process, which delays the care, prenatal care, and other care for people who need it now. So I would disagree with this amendment.
Chair Gibbs.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've had many discussions over Start Right, and this board has asked for and actually contracted with the university to get some statistical information, excuse me, statistical information on the success and potential prevention that Start Right provided to the citizens in Marathon County. Now, what they found was, and I'm not going to truly be 100% accurate, but what the department has done is they've gone out and said or one of the reports reported that it was difficult to get statistical information from Start Right. And what they did find, though, also was that the nurse family program is evidence-based nationally and does provide a huge amount of statistical information that will prove that the value of the dollar spent here is returned because it prevents huge amounts from challenges with children in the future years that the county would be ultimately responsible for. So I am in support of that program. I really struggle with how you have a program and you then put $230,000 in, and it's a contractual program, and then all of a sudden we sunset it while we're waiting for an RFP. I think a better approach is, if we're going to fund the program, and then go out, and if there's another, and I think the staff did a wonderful job by doing the research and coming back with evidence-based decisions and evidence-based programming that has multiple years of statistical data that shows the benefits that the program has. I've been on this board, and I've told many of you that I've been on this board 17 years. We've had discussions about Start Right multiple times. And only recently did we finally actually have the university actually do a study. And they came back with some recommendations, and I applaud the health department for moving down the road where there is now evidence-based decisions, evidence-based factual information, and evidence-based statistics. And it's not just Marathon County, it's nationally.
Supervisor Marshall.
I would challenge that. Why then do only 8 out of 72 counties participate in this program if it is so beneficial to reducing their future expenses? You're kind of proving a counterfactual to say that this child is going to have these needs if we don't take care of it at this point. And if I'm looking at the dollars right, if we have 730,000 roughly, and we're serving 125 candidates, it's $5,840 per individual served for just that 1 year. You had mentioned, or when I read about the program, it is birth to 2 years, so roughly $11,000 per individual helped.
Supervisor Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One thing that I really worry about here is, I think Supervisor Lemmer mentioned this, is the gap that we're going to have. Maybe the health officer can speak a little more to this, but I believe nurse-family partnership is going to be ready to go towards, once this budget is passed. I am concerned with the months-long process it might be to find a new provider. I'm also concerned that, if we open up to an RFP process and it's decided that whoever gets that needs accreditation and a group gets it and needs accreditation, and then they're going to have to go out and seek that accreditation, which might take another year. So meanwhile, children are still being born in Marathon County. That's still going to happen. So I'm really concerned about that. We have here something that has been properly vetted by the health board. It's gone through Health and Human Services Committee as well. It's gone through the process to show that this is needed, that this is vital. The process is here. So with that, I'm in support of nurse-family partnership and then would oppose this amendment. Thank you.
Any other comments or motions? Or no recommendation? What are your wishes? Supervisor Lemmer?
I would move to not bring this amendment forward
Not
to
to
the board.
recommend, or not
Recommend, not to
Yeah.
recommend.
Seconded by Supervisor Leahy. Any discussion? Any discussion? If not, all those in favor will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
No.
That motion does not carry. Carries, but not unanimously. All right, then we go on to number 12. Similar resolution, but different amount. Supervisor Sandolsky is not here. Does anybody wish to speak in favor of it? Or are you ready to take action? Supervisor Bonner.
I was just going to ask, Mr. Chair, is there by chance Supervisor Sandelsky joined us electronically?
Oh, I did. Nope. Supervisor Jean?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll make a motion not to recommend this to the full board.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Gibb. No, nope, this is number 12. I'm sorry for moving along too fast. It's just, any discussion? Supervisor Hart?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With this amendment, I just wanted it to be noted that this also doesn't fully cut the program. I believe it takes it down to 75,000, which is, again, kind of unusual to be advocating for eliminating it, but not completely eliminating it. And I know the supervisor isn't here to speak on it, but that's something that I will have a question on tomorrow. So thank you.
All right. Any other discussion? If not, all those in favor of the motion not to recommend will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries. Motion 13. This is Supervisor, I believe, Sherfinsky. He's not here. Does anybody else wish to? No. Nope. Supervisor Leahy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really like this program, the proposed idea to use this grant funding in a creative and evolutionary way to help the Social Services Department, as they've been instructed to do by the federal government. I'm not trying to downplay the importance of it, but because we've now talked about this program, I don't know, like 5 times, I'm ready to make a motion that we not recommend this amendment to the full board.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion on that motion? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no?
No.
Not carried, but not unanimously. All right, we are on to Amendment 14, the chiller at the library. And we do have Jamie, or no, well, this one is not her, so I apologize. So this is a capital improvement project, and we went through where the money comes from. It was a KIP request that we took to the board, both informationally and then to approve the preliminary KIP. And now we have a request to decrease the funding for the study. Anybody wish to speak in favor of it? Supervisor Baker.
I'm not speaking in favor or against it. I believe the concern that Sandelsky has is that it seems an unreasonable amount of money for just the design of a chiller. So if we could have some more information on that, I don't know if that's possible to provide a little more information on, you know, why that design is that cost. Or
Deputy Administrator Holman is here to enlighten us.
The non-mute mic? All right, perfect. So this particular project, the $275,000 for design is a very well-educated estimate. And what it comes from is a cost opinion. We reached out to an engineering firm. They provided a line item budget for what the overall project would be. And so they recommended approximately 8% for design costs, which works out to a little over $200,000. The $275,000 folds in the design, the bidding document preparation and process, and the administration of the project as it moves forward. And so the number itself came from the probable cost opinion.
I'm curious, I'm fairly familiar with HVAC systems. I'm wondering if there's some terminology. Is this just a chiller, or is this a whole HVAC system throughout the building? Because if it was accurately phrased as something more than a chiller, that would perhaps make a difference.
Yeah, it's a complete overhaul of the system. It's an extremely inefficient system. It's a little over 20 years old at this point. One of the features, I suppose, of the system is that it uses city water for the cooling, kind of like a glorified swamp cooler. So in the hot months, you're looking at $21,000 a month in water bills. The new project will completely get rid of that because you'll be using glycol and other things for coolants. And so then the cost recovery over the length of time, the life of the project is certainly there, I think. But yeah, it includes, the chillers themselves, but then also overhauling the system as a whole.
Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It also has to be noted that, as Assistant Administrator mentioned, that this uses a lot of water, up to 25,000 in the summer. Dollars worth of water. The City of Wausau is also increasing their water rates because of the new treatment plant. So that's going to be additional costs. So the further we delay this, that means the more we pay out to the City of Wausau in water cost for continued years until this gets resolved. I think we definitely need to move to a more efficient system. It is the entire library branch headquarters building. That might be as old as I am, I'm not sure. But it needs an overhaul, otherwise we're kind of bleeding costs there, so thank you.
Stacy.
Thank you. Is this the only cost opinion we received, or did we try to get more?
I'm not familiar with who all they might have reached out to, but it was a local engineering firm that they probably reach out to for these sorts of things. Basically to move beyond sort of an arbitrary estimate or guesstimate, if you will, to something a little more concrete so that you'd have something to build the budget around. To be clear, I sent the cost opinion and some explanation to Supervisor Sandelsky as well after the October meeting when he had asked the question, so I can forward that to anybody who'd like to see it as well.
Thank you. I looked it all over. It was in a packet. Thank you.
Just if I can clarify one thing. So this is, again, I'm saying something you all know. This is your budget is a guiding document. We are not going to spend that money without putting out an RFP for the specific services that are outlined there. So I infer from your question, well, maybe we'll get a better number. That's absolutely true. Maybe the cost opinion was high and we'll get a a bid in through our process of $220,000. But we need to have funding allocated. We're not going to put out an RFP without what we believe to be sufficient funding available to fund it, because once that happens, our relationship with contractors is not positively impacted by putting out RFPs that we have no funding to go forward on. So you're absolutely right. Our procurement process is going to require us to go through that process. This is simply the budget building process. It's you reach out to one contractor to see, what it's going to cost to replace your water heater. It doesn't mean you have to go with that one. You might make then 4 phone calls, which is the next step.
Chair Gibbs.
I think it leads to the question or more so the understanding that, again, as the administrator alluded to, this is the budget building process. We still go through the procurement process with a bidding and if the bidding comes in and the project is overfunded or underbid, or comes in at a much lower cost than the 275 allocated, that money is not just thrown away. That money is provided in a rollover in the CIP fund. And that's why we have, after the year end, when the projects are complete, there's extra dollars that are in that CIP fund that roll over to the next year and then are used for additional or different capital projects. So once we close out projects, then but again, as the administrator alluded to, we lose credibility if we bid a project, go out to an RFP, and then come back and say, oh, by the way, we're not going to do that anymore, just because we didn't have any funding for it. Or we required to go out to bonding, and lo and behold, we don't have the support from the board to do bonding on a project. So,
Supervisor Lemmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm getting tired, and so forgive me, but if we don't fund this, if this moves forward and the funding is pulled, what happens to the money? It goes back to the KIP fund, and then it just sits there?
not 100%. I guess I'll address it because I was in conversations with the finance director. Those funds came out of the fund balance, and so that's why they go back to the fund balance. So they aren't affecting operating, but they go back into the fund balance. So when this fund balance is audited, and if those are left over at that time, then they would roll into CIP by our policy.
Roy Hart, and then Sean.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is just a quick point. I know the overall discussion is reducing the levy rate. This doesn't do that, and that also applies to, I think, the next few amendments. So I know the overall discussion among the board is to try to reduce that levy rate. It does need to be noted that anything that we do to touch CIP does not do that. So all we do is just let this money sit, essentially.
All right, Supervisor Jean.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion not to recommend this to the full board.
Moved by Jean, seconded by Lemmer. Any discussion? Not all those in favor will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries. Amendment 15. And we have Jamie here. And this is the Oak Plain Road repairs. Supervisor Jean.
Eau Claire Dell's parking lot.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're right. I
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
printed out the wrong KIP request form, so I've got it right, the Eau Claire. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Claire Reach.
I think this is fairly similar to the discussions that we've been having, so I'm going to make a motion not to recommend this to the full board.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Sat Lemmer, seconded by Lemmer. Supervisor Leahy.
Just in light of the fact that the director has stayed this whole time, thank you for being prepared to answer questions at 8 p.m. I think something with the Parks Department, amendments in particular to note is that, yes, not only will this not affect the tax levy, the tax rate, but also these are sources of revenue for the county. And we've had discussions before at this committee level and probably within the Parks Department committees as well, that an important aspect of keeping up and modernizing and keeping things up to code is that we need to do that so visitors want to keep coming and give the county money to stay at our campsites and use, our resources. So just wanted to point that out, that this is an important source of revenue. Thank you.
Anything you'd like to add?
Not specifically, no.
Chair Gibbs.
I think it begs the question, when we read, when this committee, through its oversight, decided to look at the CIP process, and we identified staff and the maintenance of and maintaining of the assets that the taxpayers have purchased and paid for, and maintaining them in good repair and understanding when stuff is out of date. I remember when I served on this board early, we had a policy that we only funded projects that the CIP money had, and when that ran out, we didn't fund any more projects. That led to some extreme overruns and extreme costs that we later had to adjust and fix for. A prime example would be the library building roof itself. Another one would be the jail facility. So that's why this committee said, look, we're looking at property when it's at its end of life. If we want to do the fiscal responsible thing for the taxpayers of Marathon County, any business would totally fix and maintain the property that it owns and the property that it is taking, and that effectively, in this case, generates money. So I clearly support the motion and the second, but I think it begs the question to provide the education to the full board that the reason that we look at the CIP the way we do now is because we want to maintain the property for the taxpayer in its best condition, as any business would do when it uses business rationale.
Any other discussion? If not, all those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries. On to Amendment 16. DC Everest restroom vault toilet. Supervisor Jean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to make a motion not to recommend this to the full board.
It's been moved to not recommend, seconded by Chair Gibbs. Any discussion?
I'd like to ask the director, I understand we have in the DC Everest Park, so we have a vault toilet, and this project will actually hook up to the municipal system and then potentially eliminate, if that vault were to fail, potential contamination to water that was very close to that?
That's exactly correct, yes.
Thank you.
Could you explain the multi-year nature of this?
Yes, this facility, we do plow. It's a major source of access for ice fishing, as well as, year-round boating, and it is the home of the Wassaski show that's down there at DC Everest Park. So it does get quite a bit of public use as well, but we do maintain this facility year-round. So when we do go to city and sewer water, we'll have to have a heating component to it, but it will be a very small addition to the restroom, but it will still be allowed to be used year-round.
Supervisor Marash, did you have a question or comment?
I did, but now it changed. Thank you. So I just want a little clarification. So it would be flush toilets then? Is that what we're looking at for the amount of money that we're asking for instead of a vault toilet?
Correct, and that's usually we do these vault toilets. We've been updating them over the last couple of years, and it has been significantly lower. The addition is that hookup to that city sewer and water to make it flush toilets to help reduce with the contamination possibility long-term, and to enhance them based on the usage of that park as well. The Lake Association's also adding an ADA kayak launch there, so we anticipate it to get even more use, but it's a heavily used facility.
So we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Not all those in favor of not recommending it signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries. Next is Amendment 17. The eliminate the funding for the demolition of the cold storage facility. I'm just going to interject on this one because we've been talking with the deputy administrator. This is a facility that 5 years ago had a fire. The county took over ownership. The city has been patiently waiting for us to tear it down. If we don't, they'll issue a raise order, and then we'll be forced to take it down probably. If we don't take it down at significantly higher cost, we'll do it with our crews, and I don't think that there's a choice. It's just a matter of when. And I think the city's losing patience with the county. Supervisor Marash.
Thank you. So you said that the county would be tearing it down?
We own the building.
We own the building, so we would be doing the work. So the proposal that we're using for the KIP proposal that we got from PGA, I believe, that's just to secure the funds as we discussed before, correct? With the
Chris is
other-
nodding yes, so yes.
Thank you.
Any discussion? Supervisor Hart.
I will make a motion to recommend, to not recommend this amendment to the full county board.
Any discussion? Not all those in favor of making the motion or adopting the motion not to recommend signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries. 18, proposed amendment on the iPads. Anybody here to speak in favor? Supervisor Baker.
Again, I'm not speaking in favor, but I asked Bobby before he left if he wanted me to make comments. So basically, his thought is that because we're in the middle of a term, it would be more effective to change the iPads out at the end of the term, not to require everyone to do it now. And he said he didn't think that there was enough issues with the iPads to justify replacing them all. So I'm sure he can provide more information tomorrow night.
Chair Gibbs.
Yeah, and talking to CCIT, these iPads, the current iPads that the current board has, is at its end of life, and there are some problems starting to show up. Battery life is being one of the main things that starts to be challenging, and so I think it becomes very challenging for a board, especially now that we've moved to the voting system that we have, that if we start having multiple iPads, batteries run out in the middle of a meeting. This meeting going on 5 hours, I'm pretty sure most iPads didn't last 5 hours. But that being said, again, they're at the end of life, and so I've seen when we didn't schedule for replacement and the challenges that became at later point, and so I think I would actually support moving this forward as not supporting it because I think they do need to be replaced at end of life.
Supervisor Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to know if there was a question of security as well with iPads getting older. Is there any possibility that the older these get, the riskier they are to hack, I think is what I'm trying to say?
Are you talking about computers or people?
Probably both, but no, the iPads themselves, because on the surface I was like, oh yeah, I don't need a new iPad, but if there is a risk to security, that's something I want to take into consideration, especially I think I just received a text message from Chair Gibbs today So, I want to
Again.
take.
You didn't send any money yet either.
I haven't. I have yet to send those gift cards. But
Don't be surprised, I got one myself. So I didn't call myself though either.
So with that in mind, I just want to make sure that we're not putting anything at risk because obviously security with technology is a thing that's happening. So thank you.
Chris, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, we work iPads in my profession, and typically what you have is not security issue because they're pretty well locked down. The issue you have is the operating system, that you can't update your operating system, and then that can reduce whether the ability to bring in a new app. So say Open Meetings gets kicked out and we get another app that comes in that works well every meeting. Some iPads might not be able to get that new technology. Thanks.
All right. What are your wishes? Supervisor Jean.
I'll make a motion I'd like to recommend it to the full board.
Been moved not to recommend. Is there a second? Second by Lemmer.
Excuse me?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
Supervisor Lamont and I have our hands raised. I think his was up first.
Oh, I'm sorry. Bruce, and then Michelle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to comment that I've been listening the whole time, and my iPad is still at 50%.
You've got a great lithium battery or whatever. It's just... Michelle?
I don't know if this comment needs to be answered now or if anyone has an answer, but one thing I would be interested in exploring is if an iPad is necessary for every supervisor. I don't use my iPad and I don't want to use my iPad. I find that I can use my own computer and my cell phone to do everything that I need to do. So that could be a cost savings there if other supervisors felt the same way and wanted to utilize their personal devices.
Jake?
Never mind.
Kurt?
I would just, the one caveat to that is, historic preservation of records. When you start using your own equipment, your own computers, I understand your emails are still being saved because you're just running an email through there. But there is additional potential security issues. And so that's the only caution that I have. And we've had those discussions, because I used a laptop myself. But the laptop is provided to the chair position. So, but this is a county-issued laptop. So I just caution when we start to offer up potential use of other computers, updating those then become a potential security issue if we don't update those operating systems from CCIT. They've told us that, and so that's the only caution that I have.
Bring your own device. It may be worthwhile to do a survey and have Jerry do an educational program for the board going forward on the security issues and reason. Chris?
I was just going to say, when you mention using a laptop, perhaps a laptop is actually cheaper than an iPad. Something to consider.
Or Chromebooks or something like that. And
Correct.
it would give us more functionality too.
Lance?
I think to Supervisor Dickinson's point, I think it's a very good point, and my suggestion again, the budget is allocating funds. It doesn't mean you need to buy, the board needs to buy iPads or CCAT needs to buy iPads, but should you do an evaluation that wants to move forward, as Supervisor Dickinson referenced, with some other device, at least you have the funding allocated to do it, as opposed to not having the funding in the budget. Having the funding in the budget doesn't mean you need to spend it, but it's tough to spend money that isn't in the budget. Christie gets very upset.
And I agree. I'm not an Apple fan.
You agree that Christie gets upset?
I agree that Christie gets upset because I'm not an Apple fan. All right. Do we vote on?
Not yet.
We had a motion, though.
Motion?
And it was second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, no? That carries. I apologize to Supervisor Dickinson, we never acted upon Amendment 19. We talked about it up front. What are your wishes? Or Baker, yeah, Baker. What are your wishes? We talked about it, but we didn't act on it. Or do you not want to make a recommendation in light of the action on one? Hart, Supervisor Hart? It's been a long day.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With this, and I think I said this before, there is no obligation that we are setting up for North Central Healthcare to use these funds for, we're just giving them this money essentially. And I know the thought is to allow them to make their debt payment. But with that being said, I think I want to recommend against this. I'm not officially making that motion though at this time. Thank you.
Supervisor Baker.
We are not giving them any more money than that we are already giving them. It's the same money that we're giving them. We're just using the funds of ARPA money instead of the tax levy. So we're not giving them additional money. We're not allowing them to pay their debt off. It's simply replacing the 4.3 or whatever million is the funding source for that from tax levy to ARPA dollars. So it's whatever money we're giving them, they have the right to use however they want. It's not any additional money. It's not any less money. It's not money for debt. It's just, instead of using tax levy dollars, we're using ARPA dollars.
Any other discussion? Any other discussion? Any motions? Supervisor Jean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll make a motion to recommend this to the full board.
Is there a second? Seconded by Lemmer. Any discussion? Chair Gibbs.
Guess I want some clarification, because I understand Supervisor Baker, you're saying then, are you saying then the funding we're going to cut funding to NCHC from the other support for other agencies by $3 million and then use $3 million of ARPA? Is that what if that's...
I'm thinking that at this point, I should let Christie explain it if she's willing to, because I'm apparently not explaining it in a way you guys, that the other supervisors are understanding it.
So support for other agencies. Support for other agencies has payments to
CCID.
It's broken into two. So there's the support for the healthcare center itself, and there's support for Mount View. And what this does is that is 100% tax levy supported, and so that expense is going to stay there. And instead of the 4-point-some million in tax levy, we are in turn going to use ARPA dollars to cover as a revenue to continue to support both of those parts of the healthcare center at the same expenditure level that is in the budget at this time.
Chair Gibbs.
Thank you. So just a follow-up. So now I do understand, but if resolution number 1 were to pass and resolution 19 were to pass, as I understand it, we will then be underutilizing our operational levy limit, and the only way that we would be able to come back to and recapture that unused levy limit from the 20, and we would decrease the tax levy even greater than the 33 cents that's being reduced. This would reduce the levy rate an additional 25 cents? Something similar to that?
22.9 cents.
I missed it, sorry. I was doing it in my head. So we're going to reduce it. if resolution number 1 and this committee supported resolution number 1, and then if we were to support resolution 19, we would be reducing the operation or the tax levy to the taxpayer 33 cents based on resolution number 1, and then another 22 cents on resolution number 19 using ARPA funding. That does not, in good conscience, if we utilize ARPA up in the future and don't have ARPA, or at some point we aren't going to have ARPA, we then have to go back to using tax levy to support NCHC. We are going to have a huge increase in tax rate, and the taxpayers will not be very happy. They'll be sitting here at the same time telling us, because we just reduced it below operating, we're not taking our full operating levy limit. So I can't support it.
Supervisor Baker.
That is correct. I sent out, during the discussion of Agenda 1, I sent out an analysis which clearly states that if both are adopted, that it would impact future tax levies. I'm not advocating that. This item, or agenda item number 19, has been submitted for a week and a half prior to the idea of let's figure out a way to get around using ARPA money. I'm being cynical. I apologize in advance. So then another Agenda 1 came up. I believe that if you look at the chart I provided, it is, good arguments that Agenda 19 is preferable to 1 for various reasons. Number 1 is that I believe there are less restrictions on using general fund money than there are on using ARPA money. So why don't we use the ARPA money on something that's clearly allowed and save our money in the general fund? That way we can use in the future if we wanted, whatever we would want to do with ARPA, we can do with the general fund. Whatever comes up, that money's there. I don't see why we would want to take that money out of the bank and then have ARPA money that might go away because we didn't figure out a way to use it. So I would support 19 over 1. I don't really, I can't say that, people won't vote for both 19 and 1. I would suggest maybe you don't want to present 1. So, thank you.
All right, we've had the discussion. We have a motion and a second, not to recommend. Any discussion? Now we'll be going through all these tomorrow. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no?
No.
That motion carries, but not unanimously. All right. That takes us down to review of the proposed of the 2023 budget resolution in KIP. Based upon the action that we made a recommendation, my suggestion is we may want to advance a substitute amendment for consideration reflecting the action that was taken tonight so that we can capture that and at least present it to the county board in a resolution form and with a updated chart. What are your thoughts? Mike?
I don't think it would be a substitute amendment. I think, if I'm hearing you right, your suggestion would be an updated resolution based on the recommendations from this committee, in addition to the resolution that's already in the packet, so that both are present, or?
Well, we have the one that's been out there.
Right.
And so if we offer this as a substitute, it gets considered concurrently with, I would defer to you from a legal perspective.
Yeah, I don't think it would be a substitute, but if the amendments are passed as supported by this body, then it would become the resolution that would be voted on.
So let me ask you this, in light of the fact that we have a number of amendments, should we just deal with this at the end, but should we put in for information the updated, based on Finance Committee, this is what the resolution might look like?
guess I'd defer to Christie on what would be easier for her.
Well, the problem is that the budget resolution as originally passed versus the one that we took action on now are different because of the reduction in the North Central Healthcare borrowing for that, and therefore the levy, we go from 9.4 to 3.1.
But they didn't change it. They can't change anything until they meet. So I can make one if magically that one is the only one that passes and have it ready. But it's not reflective of what the budget looks like right now. It's still the same budget they passed in October.
Therefore, the desire to have the substitute.
I think, so I guess it would be up to this committee. You could have an informational, here's what the resolution would look like if this was passed, that you could include that. I don't know.
And that's like I gave you example, the tax levy this evening, that's not what it's at. But if you would do Amendment 1, that's what it is. So I could do another one with whatever the amendment is. But it doesn't reflect the actual budget right now. The actual budget is the one that was passed in October. So
we'll just bring it in as a separate amendment and from the floor based upon the action tomorrow. Jake?
Very quickly, and before I add this, I want to ask Corp Counsel a quick question. Corp Counsel, would it be germane now to offer a highlight of the budget because we're still in the budget discussions?
What do you mean by a highlight?
A fact about one of the departments in their budget that I'd like to highlight.
If it's germane to discussion of the budget resolution and capital improvement project plan, yes, I would leave that
To be
your
safe,
discretion.
I'll withhold it until tomorrow night.
Thank
Thank you.
Now you've piqued our interest. All right, we will deal with the amendments tomorrow. Anything else to come before us? Kurt?
I will make a motion to adjourn.
It's been moved, seconded by Hart. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, no. Anybody can vote, whether you're a committee member or not, on this one. We are adjourned.